I came back home because I'd forgotten my reading glasses on the dining room table. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where silence hugs every corner of the ranch. But as I opened the front door, I heard something that froze my blood. It was the voice of my son, Julian, whispering on the phone in French from his old bedroom. Yes, yes, the ranch is practically in my hands. All that's left is to close the deal with Cameron next week. My heart stopped. He didn't know that I also understood French perfectly. I stood paralyzed behind the door, feeling the world crumble beneath my feet. In 68 years of life, I never thought I would hear my own son plan my ruin in a language he thought I didn't understand. The old lady has no idea, he continued with a laugh that pierced my soul like a dagger. Tomorrow, we'll sign the last of the power of attorney documents. Everything will be ready for the transfer. His words were pure poison. Julian, my only son, the man in whom I had placed all my trust after his father's death, was conspiring against me. The ranch that my husband and I had built with so much sacrifice, the land that had been our family's home for decades, was all being handed on a silver platter to his greedy hands. Cameron already has the buyers lined up. He kept talking while I clung to the doorframe to keep from falling. Once we have total control, we can sell everything off in parcels. The north pastures are worth at least $300,000, and the main house another $200,000. It'll be a perfect deal. My breathing became shallow. How was it possible that my own son saw me as just an obstacle? When had he become so cold, so calculating? I remembered all the times I had signed papers he brought me, blindly trusting his explanations about modernizing the administration and protecting the family assets. Now, it all made sense. Every signature had been another step toward my own destruction. Don't worry, he told the person on the other end with a calm that terrified me. The old lady is very frail lately. She barely notices what she signs. Besides, everyone in town sees her as a confused old woman. No one will question a thing. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from a rage that was growing in my chest like a wildfire. Frail? Confused? I, who had managed this ranch alone for years after being widowed, who had raised this ungrateful wretch with a firm hand, who still got up every morning at 5 a.m. to supervise the work of the ranch hands. The meeting will be on Friday at Stephen's law office, Julian continued, and my blood turned to ice. Stephen, our trusted family lawyer, was also involved. He already has everything prepared. The documents look legitimate, but they actually give me total control over all the properties. Once signed, I can do whatever I want without the old lady being able to stop me. My legs trembled. Stephen had been my husband's friend for 30 years. We had trusted him to draft our will, to handle the estate paperwork when Arthur died. How could he have betrayed me too? Nausea washed over me as I thought of all the times I had sat in his office, signing documents he explained with a fatherly smile that now seemed utterly false. The stables will be the first to go, I heard Julian say, and my heart sank. My husband had built those stables with his own 2 hands when we were young. Our horses had been born there. Julian had learned to ride there when he was just 5 years old. Cameron says the buyers want to turn them into a strip mall. They're willing to pay up to $500,000 just for that section. A strip mall. They wanted to destroy a lifetime of memories to build a damn strip mall. The rage I felt was so intense I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. How had I raised such a heartless son? At what point had the sweet boy who used to help me feed the chickens turned into this unscrupulous monster? The guest house has potential too, his phone conversation continued. We can tear it down and build condos. The land is perfectly situated for it. The guest house where we had hosted family for Christmas holidays, where my mother had spent her final years, where we had celebrated Julian's own baptism. Everything was going to be destroyed for money. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. If my son thought I was a weak, confused old woman, then that was exactly what I was going to give him. But this time, I would be the one holding all the cards. He had completely underestimated the cunning of a woman who had survived recessions, economic crises, and the loss of the love of her life. I left the house as quietly as I had entered, pretending I had completely forgotten my glasses. A week later, when Julian showed up with his fraudulent documents and his fake smile, I would be completely prepared for what was coming. The war had begun, but he had no idea. That night, I didn't sleep a single minute. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as Julian's words echoed in my head like funeral bells. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his mocking face saying, "The old lady has no idea." At 4 a.m., I got up and walked through the entire house, touching every piece of furniture, every photograph, every memory that could soon be in the hands of strangers. My life had been perfect until that cursed Sunday. Perfectly organized, perfectly quiet, perfectly predictable. After being widowed 5 years ago, I had found my rhythm. I got up every day at 6 a.m., prepared my coffee in the same white porcelain cup Arthur had given me for our 10th anniversary, and went out to survey my ranch like a queen inspecting her kingdom. I had my sacred, unbreakable routine. On Mondays, I reviewed the accounts with the help of Maria, my only trusted employee who had been with me for 15 years. Tuesdays, I visited the town's farmers market, where all the vendors knew me by my name and saved the best produce for me. Wednesdays were for the garden, my secret passion that Arthur had nurtured by planting red roses on our first anniversary. Thursdays, I organized my documents and paid the bills. Fridays were for quilting, a skill my mother had taught me that relaxed me like nothing else. The weekends were special. On Saturdays, Julian would come to have lunch with me. He'd tell me about his work in the city, ask about my health, and help me with paperwork that he claimed was too complicated for me. He brought me flowers, kissed my forehead, and told me I was the best mother in the world. Sundays were entirely mine. Church service in the morning, a quiet lunch, a nap, and my favorite rocking chair on the porch where, in the afternoons, I read romance novels I bought from the small bookstore in town. My house was my sanctuary. Every room told a different story of my life with Arthur. The living room where we had entertained friends for decades, with the piano where he played old jazz standards for me on rainy nights. The dining room where we had celebrated every one of Julian's birthdays, every Christmas, every family achievement. The kitchen where I had learned to cook my husband's favorite dishes, where we had planned our dreams while drinking tea. Our bedroom remained sacred to me. I kept Arthur's clothes in his closet, his watch on the nightstand, his books marked on the pages where he had stopped reading forever. At night, before sleeping, I would tell him about my day as if he were still there with me. I'd talk about the flowers in the garden, the cat's antics, the news from town. I never felt alone because his presence still filled every space of our home. My neighbors respected me deeply. I was known throughout the town as Mrs. Eleanor, the strong woman who had raised her son alone after being widowed, who managed her ranch with a firm but fair hand, who helped families in need without making a fuss about her good deeds. On Sundays after church, the ladies from town would come over to greet me, ask about my health, invite me to their quilting circles. I had a solid bank account that Arthur and I had built over 40 years of marriage. Our savings amounted to nearly $200,000, the result of a life of honest work and smart sacrifices. In addition, the ranch was valued at over $2 million according to the last appraisal we had done 2 years ago. We owned 200 acres of fertile land, a 5-bedroom main house, 3 guest houses, stables for 20 horses, and an orchard that produced fruit year-round. Arthur had been a man who looked ahead. Before he died, he had organized all our documents, updated our will, and left clear instructions on how to manage our finances. "Eleanor," he had told me during his last days, "never depend completely on anyone, not even Julian. Always maintain control of what is yours." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I understood he had been prophetic. My relationship with Julian seemed perfect from the outside. He was an attentive son who visited me religiously every week, who took me to the doctor when necessary, who handled the more complicated paperwork for the ranch. Everyone in town praised him constantly. "You're so lucky, Mrs. Eleanor, to have such a dedicated son," the neighbors would tell me with genuine envy. "Not all children take such good care of their elderly mothers." Julian worked as a manager at a real estate firm in the city, a 2-hour drive from the ranch. He had explained that his job involved evaluating properties, negotiating sales, and handling complex contracts. "It's the perfect job for me, Mom," he always said, "because it allows me to understand the real value of our ranch and protect our family's assets." He was 42, had never married, and lived alone in a sleek apartment in the city. When I asked about his love life, he always gave the same answer. "I haven't found a woman who is as special as you, Mom. In the meantime, I prefer to focus on taking care of you and growing our estate." His words always filled me with tenderness and pride. For the last 2 years, Julian had become increasingly insistent on modernizing the ranch's administration. He would bring me documents that, according to him, would simplify banking procedures, better protect our properties, and give us significant tax advantages. "The world has changed a lot, Mom," he would explain with infinite patience. "You can't manage everything like in Dad's time. You need to trust me to navigate these complicated waters." I had signed everything he asked me to without reading the details. I trusted him blindly because he was my son, because he had inherited his father's intelligence, because he seemed genuinely concerned for my well-being. Whenever I hesitated, he would reassure me with kisses on the forehead and promises that he only wanted to protect me. "You're the most important thing in my life," he repeated constantly. "Everything I do is to ensure you have a quiet and worry-free old age." Now, after hearing that phone conversation, my entire perfect life was revealed as a carefully constructed illusion. My attentive son was a patient predator. My quiet routine had been the perfect camouflage for his plan. My blind trust had been his most powerful tool. And I, the strong, independent woman I thought I was, had been the perfect victim of the cruelest scam imaginable, the betrayal of one's own blood. The following Monday arrived like a cold slap in the face. Julian appeared at 10 a.m. with his usual smile and a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums, my favorite flowers, he believed. He kissed my forehead with that feigned tenderness that now made me nauseous and sat on the living room sofa as if he owned the place. "Good morning, beautiful Mom. How did my queen wake up?" "Fine, honey," I replied with the sweetest voice I could muster, while my stomach churned inside. "Maria is making your favorite lunch." It was a lie. Maria wasn't there that day. I'd given her the day off to visit her sick sister. But I needed Julian to believe everything was the same, that I was still the predictable old woman. "Perfect, Mom. But first, I need you to sign some important papers." He pulled a black leather briefcase from his bag, one I recognized immediately. It was the same one where he kept all the modernizing documents he'd brought me over the last 2 years. "It's just updates for the ranch's insurance policies. Nothing complicated." My heart began to beat like a war drum, but I kept my expression serene. "Of course, sweetie. You know I trust you completely." Each word burned my throat like acid, but I had to play my part as the naive old woman perfectly. He opened the folder and began to explain the documents with that condescending patience I now recognized as pure manipulation. "This first paper updates the fire insurance. This second one increases coverage against theft. And this third one..." He paused for a moment, looking me straight in the eye. "This third one authorizes me to make quick decisions in case of medical or legal emergencies." "What kind of decisions?" I asked with a trembling voice, feigning confusion. "Nothing serious, Mom. Just things like changing banks if necessary, selling a small piece of land if we need money for your medicine. That sort of precaution." His lie was so brazen I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming the truth in his face. I took the documents with hands that genuinely trembled, but not from confusion, from contained rage. I looked at them for several minutes, pretending to read slowly like an elderly woman with vision problems. In reality, I was memorizing every word, every clause, every legal trap he had set to destroy my life. The first document did indeed talk about insurance, but it contained a small clause authorizing Julian to collect any payout on my behalf. The second mentioned additional coverage but included a line giving him the power to mortgage the property without my further consent. The third was the most diabolical, a general power of attorney that practically turned me into a minor under his guardianship. "I don't quite understand this part," I said, pointing to a section of the third document, acting genuinely confused. "What does full authority for asset management mean?" Julian sighed with that feigned patience con artists use with their victims. "It means that if you ever get seriously ill or have memory problems, I can manage your bank accounts to make sure you have everything you need. It's just a precaution, Mom. I hope we never have to use it." "Oh, what a thoughtful son I have," I sighed theatrically as I signed the first document. My hand shook, but not from weakness, from the fury consuming me. With each stroke of my pen, I was seemingly sealing my own destruction, but I was actually beginning my revenge. I signed the second document with the same grateful old woman act. "Thank you for taking such good care of me, honey. Your father would be so proud of you." The mention of Arthur made Julian look down for a second. Was it a flicker of guilt or just discomfort at his betrayal? When I got to the third document, the most important one for his plans, I decided to act out a moment of realistic doubt. "This one seems very complicated, Julian. Shouldn't we show it to Stephen before I sign it?" "It's not necessary, Mom. Stephen already reviewed it and told me everything is perfect." Another blatant lie. I now knew Stephen was in on the conspiracy, but I wanted to confirm to what extent. Besides, today is Monday, and his office is closed. We can sign it here, no problem. "You're right, sweetie." I signed the final document with a sweet smile that hid a volcano of hatred. Always so efficient, just like your father. After I signed all the papers, Julian put them away in his briefcase with a smile of satisfaction he tried to hide. "Perfect, Mom. With this, you have all the legal protection you need." He came over and gave me another kiss on the forehead. This time, I couldn't stop my skin from crawling in repulsion. "Are we having lunch together?" he asked as he put the briefcase away like it was the most valuable treasure in the world. "Of course, honey, but I just need to use the restroom for a moment." I got up from the sofa with slow, careful movements, playing my role as a frail old woman to the end. In the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was no longer the same as she was a week ago. My eyes, which had always been sweet and trusting, now had a hard glint like steel. My face, which had shown only motherly love for 42 years, now hid a fierce determination I didn't even know I possessed. I returned to the dining room where Julian was already serving himself the lunch I had prepared that morning. His favorite pot roast, the same dish I had cooked for him since he was a child. I watched him eat with gusto while he planned my ruin, and I felt a mixture of pain and disgust I never thought I could feel for my own son. "It's delicious as always, Mom," he said, with his mouth full, completely relaxed now that he had the signatures he needed. "Nobody cooks like you." "It's a mother's love, honey," I replied sweetly, watching him chew every bite. A mother's love is the most important ingredient. After lunch, Julian said a hasty goodbye. He had an important meeting in the city. Now I knew exactly what kind of meeting it was, probably with Cameron and the buyers to start the process of selling my ranch. "I'll see you next Saturday, Mom. And remember, if you have any problems with the banks or need to sign anything urgent, call me immediately." He gave me one last fake kiss and left, whistling a cheerful tune, like a man who had just won the lottery. As soon as his car disappeared down the gravel road, I ran to my bedroom and pulled a metal box from my closet that I had kept for years in the back, behind my dresses. Inside were all the important documents for the ranch: original deeds, wills, insurance policies, bank statements. Arthur had taught me to always keep copies of everything, just in case. I reviewed each paper carefully, comparing them with my memories of the documents I had just signed. My worst suspicion was confirmed. Julian had been forging my signature for months on documents I had never seen. He had opened bank accounts in my name. He had applied for loans using the ranch as collateral. He had initiated property transfer procedures. The betrayal was much deeper and more elaborate than I had imagined. It wasn't just a recent plan born of greed. It was a systematic scam that had likely begun the very day Arthur died. My son had been stealing from me for 5 full years, taking advantage of my grief and my blind trust in him. I didn't eat dinner that night. I sat in my rocking chair on the porch, watching the stars that Arthur and I used to gaze at together, planning every step of my counterattack. My son thought he had won the war, but the battle was just beginning. That night, I couldn't close my eyes for a second. I stayed up until dawn, sitting in my rocking chair, replaying every moment of the last 5 years with a completely new perspective. It was as if someone had turned on a cruel light, illuminating dark corners I had never wanted to see. Every sweet memory transformed into another piece of the puzzle of betrayal. I remembered Arthur's funeral. Julian had been so comforting, so strong, so protective. "Don't worry about anything, Mom," he had said as I wept over my husband's casket. "I'll take care of all the legal paperwork. You just need to rest and recover." At that moment, I had thought he was the most loving son in the world. Now I understood that it had been the beginning of his master plan. How many times had he taken advantage of my grief to make me sign papers? How many times had he used my tears as a smokescreen for his fraudulent maneuvers? I remembered a specific afternoon 2 months after the burial when he had brought me a stack of documents for Dad's life insurance. I was so emotionally shattered I could barely read, and he had been so patient, so tender. "Just sign here, Mom, and here, and also here." Now I realized that probably not a single one of those papers had anything to do with Arthur's insurance. I thought of all the times he had taken me to the bank during these 5 years. "It's better if we update your account, Mom. Times have changed." I always sat in a chair while he talked to the employees, explaining that I was a bit confused because of my age, but that he had authorization to handle my affairs. The employees always smiled sympathetically and processed whatever he requested. How many accounts had he opened in my name? How many loans had he taken out using my property as collateral? How much money had he moved without my knowledge? The sheer scale of the betrayal took my breath away. He wasn't just a greedy son seizing an opportunity. He was a professional con artist who had been executing a detailed plan for years. I looked back on his weekly visits with new eyes. Every Saturday, he arrived with gifts: flowers, sweets, magazines, small tokens that made me feel loved and remembered. But always, absolutely always, he brought papers to sign. Just routine, Mom. Insurance renewals, bank updates, government forms. And I signed everything without reading, because I trusted him more than I trusted myself. When had he started to see me as an incapable old woman? Because that was the image he had built of me, both in his mind and in the minds of others. The poor, confused widow who depended completely on her wonderful son. It had been so subtle, so gradual, that I hadn't even noticed how he had been stripping me of my decision-making power. I thought about the conversations with the neighbors in town. "You're so lucky, Mrs. Eleanor. Your son takes care of everything." "Oh, I wish my son were as responsible as yours. You can tell he loves you so much. He's always looking out for you." Julian had carefully constructed a reputation as a model son, making it impossible for anyone to suspect his true intentions. He had even manipulated my social circle. I remembered how, after Arthur died, he had started subtly suggesting it wasn't a good idea for me to drive anymore. It's dangerous, Mom. Your reflexes change with age. He had insisted so much that I finally sold my car and began to depend on him to go anywhere. That had given him total control over my movements and my social interactions. I also remembered how he had started to advise against certain friendships. That Mrs. Ann is such a gossip, Mom. It's better not to tell her our family business. George seems like a nice person, but he's too nosy. It's not good for him to know so much about our finances. Little by little, he had isolated me from people who might have noticed inconsistencies in his stories or who could have given me independent advice. And what about Stephen, our supposed trusted lawyer? Now that I thought about it clearly, I recalled several strange situations in his office, documents he presented to me already prepared, without giving me time to read them, rushed explanations about changes in the law that required urgent updates, meetings where he and Julian exchanged glances that I had interpreted as fatherly complicity but now understood as communication between accomplices. The last time I was in Stephen's office, just 3 weeks ago, he had mentioned something about protecting the estate from potential future lawsuits. He had me sign something that supposedly put the ranch into a family trust to protect it from legal trouble. Now I understood that I had likely been signing the property directly over to Julian. But what hurt the most was remembering the intimate moments, the private conversations between a mother and son that he had used to manipulate me. The nights he would call just to ask how I was, when he told me I was the most important woman in his life, when he promised he would never leave me alone. It had all been an act. Had he ever truly loved me? Or had he only ever seen the money he could get from me? I remembered a specific conversation we had 6 months ago. I had mentioned that I felt lonely sometimes and had thought about selling the ranch to move into a smaller apartment in town. His reaction had been immediate and almost desperate. "No, Mom. This house is our family legacy. Dad would never have wanted you to sell it. Besides, what would you do in a small apartment? Here you have space, you have your memories, you have your garden." He had been so convincing that I completely dismissed the idea. Now I realized his panic wasn't out of family sentimentality, but because my decision would have ruined all his plans. I also thought about his personal financial situation. He had always told me he was doing well in his job, but he never showed any real signs of prosperity. His apartment in the city was modest. His clothes were simple. His car was old. Where was all the money he was supposedly earning? Or had he never had a real job and had been living off the funds he was stealing from my account? The early morning brought a painful but necessary clarity. My son wasn't just a thief. He was a sociopath who had systematically manipulated my emotions, my fears, my insecurities, and my motherly love to execute the cruelest robbery imaginable. He had used my grief for Arthur as a tool. He had turned my trust into his most powerful weapon. He had transformed my unconditional love into his greatest strategic advantage. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had completely underestimated his victim. He thought I was a weak and confused old woman, but in reality, I was a woman who had survived decades of challenges, who had helped build a family empire from scratch, who had faced the death of the love of her life and had moved forward with dignity. I had 68 years of life experience, and that experience included learning how to be cunning, determined, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, I stood up from my rocking chair with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Julian had declared a war he didn't know had begun, but I knew, and that was my advantage. He thought he had already won, but the real battle was just about to begin. Early Tuesday morning, I called Maria and asked her to come urgently. I didn't explain the details over the phone, only that I needed her help with a very important matter. Maria had been my most reliable employee for 15 years. But more than that, she had become my confidant and my only true friend after Arthur's death. If anyone could help me without asking uncomfortable questions, it was her. She arrived at 8 a.m. with her usual punctuality, but was immediately alarmed by my expression. "Mrs. Eleanor, what's wrong? You look so pale." I sat with her in the kitchen. I made her coffee as we always did, but this time we didn't talk about the weather or town gossip. Maria, I need to ask you for something very important, and I need you to trust me completely. I told her everything I had discovered about Julian, from the phone conversation in French to the fraudulent documents I had signed the day before. I saw her eyes fill with angry tears as I spoke. "That bastard," she muttered, clenching her fists. "I always thought something was off. The way he treated you when he thought I wasn't looking, as if you were a silly child. And the times I heard him talking on the phone in the garden, he always hung up when I got close." Her confirmation hurt, but it also gave me strength. I hadn't been imagining things. Other people had noticed strange signs too. "Maria, I need you to come with me to the bank today, but I have to ask you to pretend you know nothing. We're going to act like we're there for normal business." At 10 a.m., we were at the town's national bank. I had known the manager, Caroline, for years. She was a serious woman in her 50s, who had always been very professional with me. I requested a private meeting in her office, bringing Maria as my companion. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. How can I help you today?" Caroline greeted me with her usual professional smile, but I noticed something different in her expression, a kind of discomfort I hadn't seen before. "I want to review all of my bank accounts," I said directly. "I want to see all the transactions from the last 5 years, all the authorizations given in my name, all the documents that have been signed. Everything." Caroline exchanged a quick glance with her assistant. "Mrs. Eleanor, are you sure? That's a lot of information. Besides, your son Julian handles most of these matters for you. Perhaps it would be better if he were present to explain." "No," I interrupted firmly. "I want to see everything now. It's my money, and I have the right to know exactly what has happened to it." Over the next 2 hours, Caroline showed me a series of documents that took my breath away. In the last 5 years, Julian had opened 6 different bank accounts in my name. He had taken out 3 loans using the ranch as collateral, totaling $800,000. He had constantly transferred money between accounts. He had made huge cash withdrawals. He had paid for consulting services to companies I had never heard of. "Did I authorize all of this?" I asked, looking at the signatures on the documents. I recognized my handwriting, but couldn't remember signing a single one of those papers. "Yes, ma'am. You were present for all these transactions, always accompanied by your son." Caroline seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "He explained to us that you were, well, that you sometimes got a little confused, and that he had to help you with the more complicated procedures. And it never seemed strange to you that a confused woman was moving so much money?" I asked with sarcasm I couldn't hide. Caroline looked down. "Your son presented legal documents authorizing him to act on your behalf. Everything appeared to be in order from a legal standpoint." I reviewed the statements with growing horror. My main account, which had $1,200,000 when Arthur died, now had barely $50,000. The rest had been systematically plundered over 5 years. The loans Julian had taken out in my name totaled $800,000, money that had completely vanished from all my accounts. "Where is the loan money?" I asked, trying to stay calm. According to the records, it was transferred to several investment accounts and then withdrawn in cash for property improvements and specialized medical expenses. Caroline showed me the receipts. "Your son explained that you needed expensive treatments and preferred to pay in cash to maintain medical privacy." It was a lie. I hadn't had any expensive medical treatments. My health was excellent for my age. All that money had gone straight into Julian's pockets. "Can I see the statements for those investment accounts?" "Those accounts were closed 6 months ago," Caroline informed me. "Your son withdrew all the money and closed them because, according to him, the investments weren't performing well." Maria, who had been listening in silence, took my trembling hand. I was furious, but I was also calculating. Julian hadn't just stolen my money, He had left a paper trail that incriminated him completely. Every fraudulent transaction was documented. Every forged signature was on file. Every lie he had told the bank employees was noted in their records. Caroline, I need copies of all these documents. All of them. And I need you to explain exactly what authorizations my son currently has to manage my accounts. Caroline became even more nervous. Mrs. Eleanor, your son has a general power of attorney over all your finances. He can make any transaction, open or close accounts, apply for loans, transfer properties. He basically has total control. When was this power of attorney signed? 3 days ago, she replied, checking her files. On Monday afternoon, your son brought in the document signed by you and notarized by Stephen. Monday, the day after I heard the phone call. The same day he had me sign the supposed insurance papers. One of those documents had been the general power of attorney, which practically made me a minor under his care. Does that mean he can sell my ranch without consulting me? Caroline nodded sadly. With the general power of attorney, technically, yes, he can. The law assumes you have complete trust in his decisions. I left the bank with a copy of all the documents and a rage that burned in my chest like lava. But I also left with something more valuable: evidence. Documented evidence of 5 years of systematic fraud. Julian had been so arrogant, so sure that I would never suspect a thing, that he had left a perfect trail of proof. Back at the ranch, Maria and I reviewed all the documents in detail. Mrs. Eleanor, she said after reading everything, this is enough to put Julian in prison for a long time. But we need a real lawyer, not that corrupt Stephen. I know, I replied. But first, I need more evidence. I need to record him confessing everything. I need him to tell me himself exactly what he's done and why. How are you going to get that? I smiled for the first time in days, but it wasn't a sweet smile. It was the smile of a woman who had decided to fight to the end. I'm going to give him exactly what he expects. A confused and desperate old woman. I'm going to act as if I'm losing my memory and need his help urgently. I'm going to make him believe he's so close to victory that he can afford to brag about how clever he's been. Maria looked at me with a mix of admiration and concern. Are you sure you can do that? It will be very hard to pretend in front of him after everything we know. I've been acting for 5 years without even realizing it, I replied. I've been playing the part of the vulnerable widow who blindly trusts her son. Now, I'm going to consciously play the part of the old woman who is losing the battle. And when he lets his guard down completely, that's when I'll strike. Friday morning, I called Julian with a trembling, confused voice. Honey, I need you to come right away. Something terrible has happened with the bank. I don't understand anything, and I'm very scared. My performance was so convincing that even Maria, who was listening, looked at me with genuine concern for a moment. What happened, Mom? Are you okay? Julian asked with that fake concern I now recognized perfectly. I went to the bank yesterday because I needed money for my prescriptions, but they told me I don't have enough in my account, that I only have $50,000. That can't be true, can it? Your father and I had so much more money. I let my voice break as if I were on the verge of tears. There was a silence on the other end of the line. He was probably calculating what to say, how to handle this without revealing too much. Calm down, Mom. It's surely a misunderstanding at the bank. I'm on my way right now. Don't do anything until I get there. Okay. Please, hurry. I'm so confused and scared, I pleaded in the voice of a fragile old woman. I hung up the phone and looked at Maria. Now comes the hard part. I have to make him believe I'm losing my memory, that I'm desperate, that I need him to save me. I had hidden a small recorder in the pocket of my green wool dress. It was a device Arthur had bought years ago to record his important business meetings. Julian arrived in record time, less than an hour. He walked into the house with a worried expression, but I could see the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. for me to discover my financial situation when it was already too late to do anything about it. Mom, calm down. Sit here with me and tell me exactly what happened at the bank. He led me to the living room sofa and sat beside me, taking my hands with that feigned tenderness that turned my stomach. Sweetheart, I went to get money, and they told me I only have $50,000 in my account. But that can't be right. Your father and I saved for 40 years. We had over $1 million. I let tears stream down my cheeks. I didn't have to fake them. The rage and pain I felt were real, though he would interpret my crying completely differently. Oh, Mom, Julian sighed with an expression that looked compassionate, but which I now recognized as condescending. Don't you remember all the conversations we've had about this? Don't you remember we had to use the savings to pay off Dad's debts? What debts? I asked, genuinely confused by his lie. Mom, Dad had a lot of debts we didn't know about. Business deals that went bad, loans he had taken out without telling us. When he died, we had to sell investments and use the savings to pay them off. Don't you remember us talking about this many times? It was a lie so brazen that I had to bite my lips to keep from screaming the truth in his face. Arthur had been meticulous with his finances. He had no hidden debts. He had left everything perfectly documented and organized. No, I don't remember, I murmured, feigning confusion. It's normal, Mom. The stress of losing Dad really affected your memory. That's why I took care of everything, to protect you from these worries. He moved closer and hugged me. But don't worry, $50,000 is enough for your monthly expenses for a long time. But what will happen to me when that money runs out? I asked with a trembling voice. Julian was quiet for a few seconds. This was his perfect opportunity to reassure me with lies or to start revealing his true plans. Well, Mom, we've talked about this before, but maybe you don't remember. The ranch is too big for you alone. It's a lot of maintenance, a lot of expense. Maybe it's time to consider selling it and moving to a smaller, more manageable place. Sell the ranch? I feigned horror and confusion. But where will I live? We could find you a nice apartment in the city, close to me, or even a senior living community where you'd be well taken care of and have company from other people your age. His voice sounded so understanding, so concerned, that anyone listening would think he was the most loving son in the world. A nursing home? My voice broke genuinely, not from fear of going to one, but from the cruelty of his plans. He wanted to steal everything and then get rid of me like an old piece of furniture that was no longer useful. It's not a nursing home, Mom. They're like very nice hotels where seniors live comfortably and have medical help available 24/7. His explanation sounded rehearsed, as if he had been planning this conversation for a long time. But how much does that cost? If I don't have any money left? Don't worry about the money, Mom. If we sell the ranch, there will be enough to pay for a very nice community for you. There it was, confirmation of his plans. Sell everything and lock me away somewhere I couldn't ask uncomfortable questions about what happened to the money. How much is the ranch worth? I asked, feigning naivety. Well, the real estate market has been down lately. We could probably get about $300,000 for the whole thing. Another blatant lie. The ranch was worth over $2 million according to the last appraisal. He planned to sell it for much more and keep the difference. $300,000 sounds like a lot of money, I said, acting as if I'd been reassured. Yes, Mom, it'll be enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life without any worries. He got up from the sofa and walked to the window. In fact, I have good news. I've already been talking to some interested buyers. There's a development company that wants to build modern homes in this area. You've already been talking to buyers? I feigned surprise, though I knew perfectly well that Cameron and his partners already had everything planned. Just preliminary explorations, Mom, to know what our options would be when we decide to sell. He turned around and looked at me with that smile that now seemed completely sinister. But You don't have to worry about a thing. I'll take care of all the details. You just have to sign the papers when the time comes. What papers? The sale documents for the property. But like I said, I'll handle everything. You just sign where I tell you to. He came close again and took my hands. Do you trust me, Mom? This was my perfect opportunity. Of course I trust you, honey. You're the only thing I have left in this world. I'd be completely lost without you. Every word burned my throat, but I needed him to feel completely secure. Exactly, Mom. That's why you don't have to worry about anything. I'll take care of everything. The banks, the lawyers, the buyers, finding you a new home. You just have to rest and let your son take care of you. His arrogance was unbelievable. He was so sure of his total control that he was practically confessing his entire plan. And when would all this happen? Very soon, Mom. In fact, next week we have a meeting with Stephen to sign the sale documents, and then we can start looking at nice communities for you. He looked relaxed, almost happy. He was probably mentally calculating the millions of dollars he was about to steal from me. Thank you, sweetie. I don't know what I'd do without you. I stood up and hugged him, feeling disgusted but needing to complete my performance. You're the best son a mother could ask for. And you're the best mother in the world, he replied, hugging me back. Everything is going to be okay, I promise. When he left that afternoon, I had everything I needed recorded on my small device. His complete confession about the fraudulent sale plans, his lies about Arthur's supposed debts, his intention to lock me away in a home to get rid of me. But more importantly, I had confirmation that the final meeting would be next week with Stephen. That night, I called a lawyer in the city, someone who didn't know Julian or Stephen, someone who could help me without being compromised. My war was about to officially begin, and this time, I had all the weapons. Early Monday morning, I called David Sterling, a criminal defense attorney in San Francisco I had found in the phone book. I explained my situation directly and professionally, without tears or drama, just cold, hard facts and documented evidence. Mr. Sterling, I need your help with a case of family fraud. I have recordings, bank documents, and evidence of signature forgery. Mrs. Eleanor, cases like these are more common than you might think, David responded in a serious but compassionate voice. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I need to review all the documentation before I can give you definitive legal advice. At 3 p.m., Maria and I were sitting in Mr. Sterling's elegant office. He was a man in his 60s, with distinguished gray hair and an expression that inspired confidence. I had brought all the copies of the bank documents, the receipts from the fraudulent transactions, the recording of my conversation with Julian, and even photos of the forged signatures I had found on some papers. David reviewed all the material for over an hour, taking detailed notes and asking specific questions about dates, amounts, and procedures. Mrs. Eleanor, this is a solid case of aggravated fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement. Your son could face between 8 and 15 years in prison for these crimes. But can we recover my money and my property? The property, yes, definitely. We have clear evidence that the power of attorney was obtained through deceit. The money will be more complicated, but if we can trace where it is or how it was spent, there's a possibility of recovering at least a significant portion. David leaned back in his chair. But I need to ask you something important. Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed? He's your son. A criminal complaint means he will go to jail. Mr. Sterling, my son stole from me for 5 years while I was mourning my dead husband. He used my grief as a tool to destroy everything Arthur and I built together. He planned to lock me away in a nursing home after stealing everything from me. What would you do in my place? We would file the complaint immediately, he answered without hesitation. But I have a strategic suggestion. Your son thinks everything is going according to his plan, correct? What if we give him an opportunity to confess voluntarily before we proceed legally? Sometimes the shock of being discovered can lead to full confessions that simplify the judicial process. What do you have in mind? A controlled confrontation. You invite him to a meeting, ostensibly to sign the sale documents for the property, but instead, you confront him with all the evidence we have. I will be present as a witness, and we will record the entire conversation. If he confesses, the case will be much simpler. The idea both terrified and thrilled me. The chance to see Julian's face when he realized he'd been found out, that his perfect victim had turned out to be much smarter than he imagined. When could we do this? How about tomorrow? You said he expects to meet with you and Stephen this week to sign the sale documents. We can move that meeting up and turn it into a trap. That evening, I called Julian with a weak, submissive voice. Honey, I've been thinking about what you said about selling the ranch. I think you're right. I'm too tired to manage all this by myself. My acting had improved considerably over the past week. I'm glad to hear that, Mom. Are you ready to sign the papers? Yes, but I have one condition. I want it to be here, in my house. I don't want to go to Stephen's office. This house has been my home for so many years. I want to say goodbye to it properly. It was a reasonable request that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Of course, Mom. We can have the meeting there. Stephen can come with all the documents. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Perfect, sweetie. And Julian, I want you to know that I'm very grateful for everything you've done for me. You're a wonderful son. You're a wonderful mother too, Mom. I'll explain all the details of the sale and your new life tomorrow. His voice sounded triumphant. He was probably mentally celebrating his victory. Tuesday arrived with torturous slowness. I got up at 5 a.m. and had breakfast without an appetite. David Sterling would arrive at 1 p.m. to prepare for the confrontation. I had decided to hide him in Arthur's study, from where he could hear the entire conversation through the slightly ajar door. At noon, Maria arrived, more nervous than I was. Mrs. Eleanor, are you sure you can do this? It's going to be shocking to see Julian's reaction when he realizes you've found him out. Maria, a week ago, I was a naive old woman who blindly trusted her son. Today, I'm a woman who knows exactly who her enemy is and how to defeat him. I'm more than ready. David arrived promptly at 1 p.m. We went over the plan one more time. I would receive Julian and Stephen as if everything were normal. I would let them explain their fraudulent documents, and then I would reveal that I knew the whole truth. David would record everything from his hiding spot and appear as a witness at the appropriate moment. At 2 o'clock on the dot, I heard Julian's car coming up the gravel driveway. He was with someone, probably Stephen. My heart began to beat rapidly, but not with fear, with anticipation. For 5 years, I had been the perfect victim. Today, I would become his worst nightmare. Julian walked into the house with a radiant smile, carrying a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of pink roses. Mom, today is a very special day. I brought champagne to celebrate your new chapter in life. Stephen followed behind him, carrying a briefcase full of documents. What a lovely thought, honey, I said with my sweetest voice, though I felt sick seeing his fake joy. Stephen brought all the papers. The sale is practically closed. The buyers are very interested and are offering $350,000 for the whole property. It's an excellent offer considering the market. Julian looked euphoric, as if it were his lucky day. Stephen opened his briefcase and began taking out documents. Mrs. Eleanor, we just need your signature on these contracts, and everything will be finalized. Your son will handle all the subsequent details. Of course, I replied, sitting in my favorite dining room chair. But before I sign, I have a few questions. As many as you want, Mom, Julian said, pouring champagne into 3 glasses. We want you to be completely comfortable with this decision. My first question is very simple, I said, keeping my voice soft but firm. Do you two really think I'm stupid enough not to realize you've been robbing me for 5 years? The silence that followed was deafening. Julian froze with the champagne bottle in his hand. Stephen dropped the documents. They both looked at me as if they had seen a ghost. Mom, Julian stammered, his voice trembling. My second question, I continued, rising from my chair, is did you really think that a woman who helped build this family empire from scratch wouldn't recognize a scam when she saw one? Mrs. Eleanor, I don't know what you're talking about, Stephen tried to say, but his voice sounded completely false. My third question, I said, walking towards the study where David was hidden, is, would you like to meet my lawyer before we call the police? I opened the study door, and David Sterling walked out, recorder in hand and a smile that promised justice. The look of absolute panic on Julian's face was the most satisfying thing I had seen in my entire life. The transformation in Julian's face was instant and brutal. In seconds, he went from triumphant euphoria to absolute panic. His face turned white as a sheet. He began to tremble visibly, and the champagne bottle slipped from his hands, crashing onto the hardwood floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house like a harbinger of his imminent destruction. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," said David Sterling in a firm professional voice as he approached the dining room table. "I'm David Sterling, criminal defense attorney. I've been listening to your interesting business proposal." Stephen tried to react first, probably because he had more experience handling complicated legal situations. "Mrs. Eleanor, I think there's a huge misunderstanding here. We are only trying to help you with the sale of your property." "Help me?" I retorted with a dry laugh that surprised even myself. "You call stealing $200,000 of my savings help? You call forging my signature on documents I never read help? You call planning to lock me in a nursing home after selling my ranch for a fraction of its real value help?" Julian finally found his voice, though it sounded broken and desperate. "Mom, it's not what it looks like. I would never hurt you. Everything I've done has been to protect you." "Protect me?" My voice rose in volume, and for the first time in decades, I let out all the fury I had been holding back. "Were you protecting me when you opened 6 bank accounts in my name without my knowledge? Were you protecting me when you applied for $800,000 in loans using my property as collateral? Were you protecting me when you told the bank employees I was confused and that you had to manage my finances because I was no longer capable?" David took out his recorder and placed it on the table. "Gentlemen, everything you say from this moment on will be recorded and can be used against you in legal proceedings. You have the right to remain silent and to request the presence of an attorney." "Wait!" Julian shouted desperately. "This is insane. I'm her son. Everything I have belongs to her anyway. It's not theft if it's family." "Ah, it's not theft," David interjected sarcastically. "So you admit you took your mother's money without her consent?" Julian realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. No, that's not what I meant." "What did you mean, exactly?" I asked, approaching him with a calmness that surprised me. "Did you mean that you planned my financial ruin for 5 years while I mourned the death of your father? Did you mean you used my pain as a tool to manipulate me? Did you mean that every kiss you gave me on the forehead was part of your act to rob me?" Tears started to roll down Julian's cheeks, but they no longer moved me. He had cried too many fake tears in front of me over the years. "Mom, I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. I needed the money. I have debts you can't even imagine." "What debts?" I demanded. "Gambling debts," he finally confessed, collapsing into a chair like a broken doll. "I owe over $500,000 to some very dangerous people. If I don't pay them soon, they're going to kill me." The revelation hit me like a slap. My son wasn't just a thief. He was a gambling addict who had risked our entire family legacy to feed his addiction. "For how long?" 10 years, he mumbled without looking up. "It started small, sports betting, online casinos. But it got out of control when Dad died. I thought I could use some of your inheritance temporarily, win enough to pay my debts, and put it all back before you noticed." "But you lost more money betting," I completed the story. "Yes, he admitted between sobs. Every time I lost, I thought the next bet would be the one, that I could win it all back and repay you. I never planned for it to go this far. Stephen, who had been silent during this devastating confession, decided to try to salvage something. Mrs. Eleanor, Julian is young and made mistakes, but we can fix this without involving the authorities. We can set up a payment plan. We can... Be quiet, I shouted with a force I didn't know I had. You are just as guilty as he is. You knew exactly what you were doing. You prepared all the fraudulent documents. You lied to my face for years, pretending to be the family's trusted lawyer. Stephen stood up nervously. I only followed Julian's instructions. He told me you had authorized everything, that you had memory problems and... Lies, I interrupted. You knew perfectly well that I was of sound mind. You knowingly participated in this scam because Julian was paying you with my own money. David Sterling took detailed notes of every confession. Mr. Stephen, how much money did you receive for preparing fraudulent documents? Stephen remained silent, but his silence was more telling than any confession. Mom, Julian tried one last time. I know what I did was wrong, but I'm your son, your only son. If you turn me over to the police, you'll ruin my life forever. I looked him straight in the eyes, and in that moment, I clearly saw the stranger he had become. There was nothing left of the sweet boy I had raised with so much love. Julian, you ruined your own life the day you decided to steal from your mother. I'm just making sure you pay the consequences for your decisions. But I'm your family, he screamed in desperation. Family doesn't steal, I replied, my voice cold as ice. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't plan to lock you in a nursing home after robbing you blind. You are not my family, Julian. You are a con artist who happens to share my last name. At that moment, an unexpected figure appeared in the doorway. It was Cameron, Julian's partner he had mentioned on the phone call I'd overheard last Sunday. He was a well-dressed man in his 50s, with the look of a successful businessman. Good afternoon, he said with a confident smile as he walked in uninvited. I hope I'm not late for the contract signing. The silence that followed was absolutely dramatic. Cameron took in the scene. The spilled champagne on the floor, the scattered documents, the panicked faces of Julian and Stephen, my furious expression, and the unexpected presence of David Sterling with his recorder. Am I interrupting something important? Cameron asked, beginning to realize that something had gone terribly wrong. Perfect, I said with a smile that promised revenge. Now we have all the conspirators gathered in one place. Mr. Sterling, I think it's time to call the police. Cameron's expression shifted instantly from confidence to alarm as he fully understood the situation. I just came for a legitimate business meeting. Legitimate business? I asked sarcastically. Buying a property worth over $2 million for $350,000? Does that seem legitimate to you? David was already dialing the police on his cell phone. District Attorney's Office. I need to report a case of aggravated fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. In that moment, I knew I had won the war. All the guilty parties were present. All the confessions had been recorded. All the evidence was documented. My revenge was complete. 6 months later, I was sitting in my favorite cafe in town, the same one where Arthur and I used to have breakfast on Sundays after church. But this time, I wasn't alone reminiscing about the past. I was with Maria, celebrating the present and planning the future. The table was covered in legal documents, but these represented victory, justice, and a new beginning. Mrs. Eleanor, I can't believe everything that's happened, Maria said, stirring her latte. When I think about how close you came to losing everything. But I didn't lose it, I replied with a genuine smile I hadn't felt in years. I got all my money back, I kept my ranch, and most importantly, I got back my dignity and my strength. The trial had been swift and conclusive. With all the recordings, bank documents, and confessions David Sterling had obtained, the prosecutor had no trouble building a solid case. Julian was sentenced to 12 years in prison for aggravated fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement. Stephen received 8 years for complicity and forgery of legal documents. Cameron, who turned out to have a record for real estate scams, was sentenced to 10 years. But the most satisfying part hadn't been seeing them sentenced. It was recovering everything they had stolen from me. David had managed to trace most of my money. Some was in bank accounts Julian had opened under false names. Another part had been invested in properties Cameron had bought as a front. We even recovered money from the online casinos where Julian had lost a large part of my savings. In the end, I recovered $980,000 of the $1,200,000 they had stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without worrying about money. More importantly, my ranch was still mine, with all its land, its memories, and its sentimental value intact. "Have you heard anything from Julian?" Maria asked carefully, knowing it was a sensitive topic. "He wrote me a letter last week," I replied without emotion, asking for forgiveness, saying he's in treatment for his gambling addiction, begging me to visit him in prison. I took a sip of my coffee before continuing. "I threw it in the trash without finishing it." "You don't feel even a little bit of pity for him?" I reflected on the question for a moment. It was the same question the neighbors, the church pastor, and even David Sterling had asked me. How could a mother be so hard on her own son? "Maria, for 5 years, Julian stole not just my money, but my peace of mind, my trust, my dignity. He made me believe I was losing my memory, that I was a burden to him, that I depended completely on his kindness to survive. He emotionally manipulated me while planning my financial destruction." I paused, organizing my thoughts. The man in that prison is not the son I raised. He is a stranger who took advantage of my motherly love to destroy me. "But he's still your son," Maria insisted gently. "No," I replied firmly. "My son died the day he decided to steal from his mother. What's left is a criminal who deserves to pay for his crimes. If I feel pity for anyone, it's for the mother I was, who loved that little boy with all her heart, never knowing what he would become." We changed the subject because I didn't want the past to ruin my present. I was 68 years old. I had survived the cruelest betrayal imaginable, and now I had a brand new chance to live life on my own terms. Over the last 6 months, I had made significant changes to my routine and my outlook. First, I had hired an independent financial advisor to manage my investments. Never again would I depend on a single person for such important matters, not even myself. I had 3 different professionals overseeing my finances from different angles. I had also modernized the ranch in ways Arthur and I had dreamed of for years. I installed solar panels, completely renovated the stables, planted a larger organic garden, and hired 2 young employees to help with maintenance. The property had never been so beautiful and productive. But the most important change was internal. I was no longer the vulnerable widow who blindly trusted others. I had become an independent woman who made her own decisions, who questioned everything, who verified every detail before signing any document. I was a stronger, wiser version of myself. "And what are your plans for the future?" Maria asked as we ordered a second round of coffee. "Many plans," I answered with enthusiasm. "First, I want to travel. Arthur and I always dreamed of seeing Paris, but we never found the perfect time. Now that I have my money and my freedom back, I'm going to fulfill that dream. I already bought the tickets for next month." "How exciting! Are you going alone?" "I'm going alone, and I'm happy to do it," I replied with pride. For too many years, I depended on others to make important decisions. This trip will be completely mine. And after Paris? After, I want to dedicate myself to helping other people who might be in situations similar to mine. David Sterling told me there are many elderly people who are victims of family scams, but don't know how to defend themselves or are afraid to report their own children. I grew excited as I spoke about this new mission. I'm thinking of creating a foundation that offers free legal advice and emotional support to victims of family fraud. That's a wonderful idea, Maria said with admiration. Your experience could help so many people. Exactly. I want my story to serve a purpose beyond just my own justice. I want other people to know that it's never too late to fight back. That being older doesn't mean being helpless. That real family love never includes abuse or manipulation. We finished our coffee as I told her more details about my future plans. I wanted to learn French formally, not just the basic phrases Arthur had taught me. I wanted to take painting classes, something that had always interested me but I never had time to explore. I wanted to meet new people, form friendships based on shared interests rather than simple proximity. When we left the cafe, we walked slowly to my car, the same car I had bought back after regaining my financial independence. Driving it back to my ranch, I felt completely free for the first time in years. That night, before sleeping, I did something I hadn't done since before discovering Julian's betrayal. I spoke to Arthur, just as I used to every night. My love, I had a beautiful day. I'm okay. I'm strong. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. I think you'd be proud of how I handled this whole situation. I looked at his photograph on the nightstand and smiled. You taught me that real family protects and cares, never destroys. You taught me to be strong when necessary. You taught me that real love never asks you to sacrifice your own dignity. I settled into bed, feeling completely at peace. Tomorrow, I start a new life, Arthur. A life where I am completely free, completely independent, and completely my own. Through the window, the soft light of the full moon streamed in, illuminating my room with the same serenity I had felt during my first years of marriage. It was a new beginning, a second chance to live on my own terms. I fell asleep that night with a smile on my lips and a heart full of hope. I was 68 years old. I had survived the most painful betrayal imaginable. I had fought for my justice, and I had won. But more important than all of that, I had discovered that it's never too late to reclaim your power, your dignity, and your right to be happy. Today, I am alone, but for the first time in many years, I am completely at peace. A year later, I was sitting in a Parisian cafe, exactly as Arthur and I had dreamed of for so many years. The Eiffel Tower stood majestically in the distance as I savored a perfect croissant and read a letter that had just arrived from Florida. It was from a 73-year-old woman named Deborah, whose daughter had been stealing her pension for months. Dear Mrs. Eleanor, the letter said in a shaky hand, I saw your interview on television about the Golden Hope Foundation and wanted to write to thank you. Because of your story, I found the courage to report my own daughter. I thought I was crazy for distrusting her, but you taught me that a mother has the right to defend what is hers. I smiled as I folded the letter carefully. It was the 5th similar letter I had received that week. My foundation had helped over 200 families in the last 8 months, providing free legal advice, psychological support, and resources for seniors who were victims of family financial abuse. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Maria calling from the ranch. Mrs. Eleanor, how's Paris? Beautiful, Maria. I visited the Louvre yesterday, and tomorrow I'm taking a painting class by the Seine. My voice sounded cheerful and relaxed. How are things back there? Everything's perfect. The new hires are doing great work in the orchard. And David Sterling called to say another large donation came in for the foundation. A businessman from Chicago, whose mother was scammed by his brother, wants to support the cause. Excellent. When I get back next week, we'll review all the new cases. I paused to admire an elderly couple walking hand in hand down the street. Maria, have you heard anything from... No, she interrupted gently, knowing exactly who I was referring to. I haven't heard anything about Julian, and frankly, I think it's for the best. She was right. The first few months after the trial, I had felt a strange mix of relief and melancholy. relief for having my life and dignity back, but melancholy for the definitive loss of the son I thought I had. Over time, the melancholy had completely disappeared. Now, all that remained was a lesson learned and an unshakable determination to live life to the fullest. After hanging up with Maria, I decided to wander the streets of Paris with no particular destination. During my month in France, I had discovered a version of myself I never knew existed. An adventurous, curious, completely independent woman. I had taken French classes, visited museums, met fascinating people, tried new food, and slept in late without anyone questioning my decisions. In a small art gallery, I stopped in front of a painting of an older woman painting in a garden full of flowers. The woman in the painting had a serene but determined expression, as if she had finally found her purpose in life. I recognized myself in that image. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said in English with a slight European accent. I turned and saw a man in his 70s, elegantly dressed, with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "Yes, very beautiful," I replied. "It reminds me of someone I know." "My name is Gilbert," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I live in Paris, but I'm originally from Boston." "Eleanor," I replied, accepting his handshake. "From California." We began talking about art, about travel, about life. Gilbert was a widower like me. He had lost his wife 3 years ago and had decided to move to Paris to start a new chapter. He was an amateur painter, loved classical music, and had a contagious laugh that immediately put me at ease. "Would you like to have a coffee with me?" he asked after an hour of fluid conversation. "I know a charming place near the Luxembourg Gardens." For a moment, I hesitated. For decades, my life had been defined by my relationship with Arthur, then by my role as a mother, and finally by Julian's betrayal. The idea of meeting someone new, of opening my heart to new possibilities, was dizzying. But then I remembered the most important lesson I had learned during this year of transformation. It's never too late to start something new, to take a risk, to live fully. "I'd love that," I replied with a smile. We walked together through the cobblestone streets of Paris as he told me stories of his life, and I shared some of mine. I didn't tell him about Julian, about the betrayal, about the pain. Those were parts of my past that had already served their purpose, to make me stronger, wiser, more independent. At the cafe, we ordered red wine and French cheese. Gilbert showed me photographs of his paintings and told me about his plans to open a small exhibition. I told him about my foundation, about my desire to help others, about my new dreams of traveling the world. "You're an extraordinary woman, Eleanor," he said as we toasted with our wine glasses. "It's clear you've lived through a lot and have come out stronger for it." "I've learned that life can change completely at any moment," I replied. At 68, I discovered I could be a completely different person than I thought I was. As the sun began to set, Gilbert walked me back to my hotel. As we said goodbye, he asked if I would like to have dinner with him the next day. I accepted without hesitation. That night, alone in my Parisian room, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I never imagined I could be. I was no longer Arthur's devoted wife, nor Julian's sacrificed mother, nor the victim of a family scam. I was simply Eleanor, a free, independent, strong woman, ready for whatever adventure life offered. The next day, I would return to California to continue with my foundation, to keep helping other people, to keep building the life I had chosen. But I would also return with the certainty that the world was full of unexpected possibilities. I fell asleep that night thinking of Arthur, thanking him for teaching me that true love gives freedom. It doesn't take it away. I thought of Julian, not with pain, but with the peace of someone who has definitively closed a chapter. And I thought of Gilbert, of the conversations we'd had, of the possibility that there were new forms of companionship and affection I had yet to explore. At 69 years old, I was living the best time of my life. I had health, money, purpose, and the complete freedom to decide what to do with every day I had left to live. I was a woman alone. But I had never been less lonely in my entire life. I was a free woman, and freedom was the most beautiful gift I had ever given myself.